Okay guys, in today's video what we're going to be doing is going over an interesting article that I've come across, and what I want to do is read it here and go over it and kind of counter it, because it's an article that's an opinion-based one, and it's titled PlayStation Will Lose the Next Console War, Here's Why. And I'm sure as most of you know that I just don't agree with that idea. I'm willing to hear people out. I'm willing to hear this article out and read it and go over the points that they bring up. Doesn't mean I'm going to agree with them, but I think it's interesting. And so what I want you guys to do is, before hitting the like or dislike button, I want you to use the like or dislike button as a way to let me know what you think. If you think PlayStation is going to lead next generation in the console market space, hit the like button. If you think that Xbox is going to lead in the console market space and they're going to be the one that dominates, hit the dislike button, so that way we have a good idea of where people stand. Obviously, also be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, but I know that some people are going to read the title of this video and just assume that this is what I'm saying, but this is in fact not what I'm saying. That should be kind of obvious to anybody who's been following the channel. I'm going to be going over this article and countering it, so let's get into it here. So again, PlayStation will lose the next console war, here's why. Though we technically have yet to hear anything official from Sony regarding its next generation gaming machine, see, right off the bat, I don't know if that's necessarily true. It depends what you mean by official. We have heard Sony talk about the PlayStation 5 officially on record, but I guess they're talking about like having an actual event and fully showing everything off and whatnot. So I guess in that case, yeah. We're pretty confident that after 4 successive PlayStation consoles, the PlayStation 5 isn't about to shake anything up in terms of branding. The PS5 will likely launch alongside Microsoft's Project Scarlett in November or December of 2020 and will represent the next great leap in terms of graphical fidelity, ushering in the 9th generation of gaming consoles. Without any concrete details concerning specifications, launch lineups, or price points, it's tough to say definitively who will be the early frontrunner in the next-gen console war, but we're willing to hazard a guess that Microsoft's more consumer-friendly approach and less draconian outlook on things like crossplay and game streaming will give it an advantage in an era that's shaping up to be far less forgiving of the gaming freedoms console manufacturers have traditionally held. So, okay, starting here with what they're saying about Microsoft being more pro-consumer. Okay, that is a good point to bring up. There's no doubt that Microsoft has made some pretty significant changes this generation, and a lot of the things they've done were things I guess you could consider pro-consumer, but you have to understand why these decisions were made in the first place. It's because Microsoft's intention was to attempt to sell 200 million Xbox One consoles, and we all saw how that turned out. So suddenly, Xbox was essentially a sinking ship, and they had to do everything they could in any way they could to win customers back. And so these pro-consumer moves, while they are good, you have to understand why they were done in the first place. It wasn't because it's like the consumer came first, it's because that's just how badly Microsoft messed things up at the start of the generation with the Xbox One. And talking about things like crossplay, yeah, I mean, we know that Sony was hesitant to do crossplay, but you know what? Here's the reality of it. They did do it, even while being in the lead. I mean, the truth is, Sony had really not much to gain by doing crossplay, but I will admit they did certainly have something to lose by continuing to resist it. So I think that they did the right thing, and that's the point here. You know, you're bringing up crossplay, but as far as I know, Sony greenlit crossplay and allow it for any games that want to do it. We're seeing more and more games become crossplay. I mean, the newest Call of Duty that just came out, it has complete crossplay functionality, you know, so, you know, calling Sony draconian, you know, talking about game streaming, listen, just because Sony's not jumping off the high dive into the pool that is game streaming, not knowing if it's shallow or not, doesn't mean they're not dipping their toes in the water to find out. So this is the mentality that I don't understand, where like, yeah, you can point these things out that Microsoft is doing and maybe embracing more so than Sony, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate into a more successful console going into next generation, because you have to remember that's what we're discussing here, right? The console aspect of these companies. But continuing the article, Says at the end of the current generation, Sony was desperate for a win following the ho-hum reception of the PlayStation 3, and Microsoft, having grown complacent and short-sighted after a near decade of success with the Xbox 360, assumed that it no longer needed to cater to the interests or needs of fans. As a result, Sony totally stole the show in 2013 with the launch of the PlayStation 4, and the original Xbox One went down as a bloated, obtuse piece of unwanted hardware. Wow, that's a pretty harsh way of putting it. Now Microsoft's Xbox brand is desperate to regain the attention of the gaming populace, and Sony doesn't seem to realize that it has quite a bit to lose going into 2020 and beyond. As a result, Project Scarlett may well pull the rug out from beneath Sony's feet, and it may find itself back to where it was at the beginning of the 7th console generation. So, I mean, okay, like, this isn't really highlighting anything that makes me feel confident in what they're saying, making such a claim that, you know, PlayStation is going to lose the next console battle by pointing these things out. Because, I mean, yeah, we know why Sony had to go all in with the PlayStation 4 because of the mistakes that they made with the PlayStation 3. We also know the massive mistakes that Microsoft made with the Xbox One. And what we can take from both of these things is that, yes, when a company makes these types of mistakes, they do become desperate to win the gamer back, to win the consumer back. But you have to understand what Sony did during I'd say the later half of the PlayStation 3 generation, and especially what they did throughout this entire generation with the PlayStation 4, was they focused as intensely as they could on the hardcore gamer, at their core consumer, at the audience that they lost. And the audience that they lost was that core gamer, right, that went to the Xbox 360 during that generation. And Microsoft pretty much had the same thing happen to them this generation with the Xbox One. But I'll tell you, like, they're not doing the things, in my opinion, that's going to win their core audience back. And their core audience, the audience that started with Xbox, think about what Xbox is. Xbox. It is a console. It is a literal gaming box with an X on it. That's how it started. I'll tell you, like, they are becoming more disconnected each year from their core audience. At least that's the way I see it. And you can just tell that a lot of people are going over to PlayStation and finding other ways. It's not that people are completely abandoning Xbox to the point where they're not interacting or playing their games at all, because people who are still interested in Halo and Gears and all this stuff, yeah, it's just they do have more options to access those games. But in terms of just talking about the console, they're kind of making it sound as though Sony is going to get complacent. And so that's where we're going to read the next part of this article. It says, hubris may well play a role in Sony's next-gen demise, but it's also important to note how ahead of the curve the competition seems to be in terms of preparedness for the future. Take, for instance, Microsoft's XCloud project. Though it's still in beta, it looks to be a great deal more competent than Sony's PS Now, and the fact that it won't be totally reliant on the cloud puts it ahead of Google's shaky Stadia launch. So, you know, talking about hubris and Sony becoming complacent, Jim Ryan is the one that is now in charge of PlayStation, and one of the first things he said when being appointed as the CEO of PlayStation is that his main goal is to ensure that Sony doesn't get complacent, because he remembers what happened with the PS3. He saw what happened with the Xbox One, and he's making sure that Sony's not going to make those mistakes, right? And so there you go. That answers that. I mean, of course, we have to take his word on it, but honestly, I don't see Sony pulling anything like they did at the beginning of the PS3's life cycle. They're not going to do that again. So sitting here and basically saying that, oh, well, Sony's going to lose next generation because they're going to get complacent and they're going to, you know, think that they're too far ahead and they're not going to worry. No, that's not the case at all. They go on to point out Microsoft's XCloud here. Listen, I'm sorry. If you're going to sit here and try to tell me that XCloud is going to be the reason that Sony doesn't win next generation in the console space or just in general, you're wrong, okay? Because for as cool as XCloud is in some areas, and I think Microsoft honestly is handling it very well. I will give them that. I don't think that that's going to be the big difference maker. Even Microsoft is aware that it's just a supplemental thing they're doing. At least that's what they're saying, right? For now, that's what they're saying. But we know what their intention is. They want, you know, the 2 billion phone market to start accessing Xbox through their phones, through xCloud. But they're saying that, look, it's just a supplemental thing. But you also have to take into account that just because you say and believe that XCloud is more competent than PS Now is making improvements. It has been making improvements. And frankly, what Microsoft has been doing in this space with XCloud is what has been pushing Sony to do this. And this is evidence that Sony's not getting complacent. We see that they're becoming a little bit more open to try and maybe utilize some of their first-party titles as a way to make PlayStation Now more appealing. They lowered the price of it, and I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of other things that Sony plans to do with PlayStation Now going in the next generation. Me personally, I don't care too much about it. That's not what I'm interested in, but there's no doubt that Sony's made it very clear that in these other areas that Microsoft is pursuing, Sony is going to be dipping their toes in that water as well, such as cloud gaming. It's not something they're just going to give up and say, we're not going to bother with it at all. Even though I don't care about cloud gaming and it's not my cup of tea, nor do I think it'll ever be, at least anytime soon, I understand that this is something that Sony needs to kind of pay attention to and be aware of in the long term. So I really just don't see how these arguments are holding up. Again, it's not doing a very good job in convincing me that there's anything here that shows or tells me that there's going to be some kind of massive comeback in the console space for Microsoft. But it goes on to say here that beyond that, the Xbox Game Pass grants players access to dozens upon dozens of worthwhile titles for a low monthly fee, and unlike PS Now, new AAA games arrive on the service on day one. Plus, Microsoft has made it so that the Xbox One is compatible with both Xbox 360 and original Xbox titles, making it the preeminent gaming setup for players on a budget. The PlayStation 4, meanwhile, isn't backward compatible at all, which only serves to lessen the console's appeal as its relevance continues to wane. Okay, so the way this article is constructed, listen, I get it. Game Pass is a good value, but when it comes to Game Pass, I feel like it's a situation that it has yet to be proven, right? Like, Microsoft's goal with Game Pass is all about numbers. They figure if they can get enough people in the door, it's kind of like the Netflix effect. Like, if people think that eventually Xbox Game Pass's price isn't going to slowly start to go up, just like we see with Netflix and other services, so they can start making more money back in the long run, you're sorely mistaken. That is what's going to happen eventually. Right now, Microsoft's just trying to get as many people in the door as they possibly can, because what Microsoft is banking on is services. And granted, Sony does care about services as well. And I will admit, I'll say this, that when it comes to Game Pass, that is an offering that on a surface level, I could see why somebody says, you know what, that's really appealing to me, something that Xbox offers. But again, I'm not going to lie here. Like, you're talking about Sony potentially losing out the next console generation with the PlayStation 5. Once people can already get Game Pass, on PC, and we know that it's going to be coming to other devices through Project XCloud. So at that point, if people want to access Game Pass, an Xbox console honestly doesn't really have anything to do with that. This is a service that they plan to get everywhere on every device. And while I do think it is a good service for a lot of gamers who are maybe, on a tighter budget, and I will admit Microsoft has been doing a fairly good job in bringing some big AAA titles there. We know that their first-party titles release there day and date. It is a great value, but, regardless of my thoughts on the cons of Game Pass, because I went into that in past videos, I'm not going to get into that here. That to me isn't the only thing that's going to suddenly cause Microsoft to dominate this space and Sony to lose it, because Game Pass has been out for a little while. Have we seen that happen yet? No, we haven't. And, again, mentioning PlayStation Now, Sony's not going to let Microsoft just take all of these consumers and bring them on the Game Pass and not offer a service of their own. They're going to do that with PlayStation Now. And, it says here that it talks about backwards compatibility. Again, listen, the Xbox One has been backwards compatible since 2015. It's almost 2020 now. Has that been the differentiating factor between people going and buying PlayStation 4s versus buying Xbox One consoles? No, it hasn't. And I'm not knocking backwards compatibility. I think it's amazing what Microsoft did, and I think it is extremely pro-consumer, and it's one of the best things they've done this generation. And frankly, I hope Sony takes note and can achieve something similar with the PlayStation 5. At the very least, we know they're doing backwards compatibility with PS4 games. But that's not why people are going out and buying new consoles. That's just the reality of the situation. So to sit here and make it seem like that something like Game Pass coupled with backwards compatibility, that's going to ensure that Microsoft has a big victory with the next gen console, that is, Project Scarlett, Anaconda, and Lockhart, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it because we have yet to see that. I just don't think that's going to be the difference maker. So, let's finish off this article here. We're almost towards the end. It says the PlayStation loyal may find it hard to believe, and it's far from a certainty, but Sony has a track record of losing the forest for the trees. See, it's funny because that exact statement is what I was thinking when it comes to Microsoft and some of the things they're doing, but it says the PlayStation 2 may have been the highest selling console of all time, but Sony failed to capitalize on that success, assuming instead that all of the goodwill it generated over the previous generation would automatically carry over to the next one. Instead, the PS3 was an inferior games machine that was comparatively lacking in first-party releases, failed to champion online gaming in the same way as Xbox Live did, and launched at an exorbitant price point. Though Sony may have well right the ship over the course over the next year, it's not unthinkable that it could fall into the exact same funk as it did in the mid-2000s. Plus, with rumors that game streaming may, in the coming years, replace consoles entirely, it's hard to know what the future will look like for the PlayStation brand. And that's where it ends. And so, listen, I understand there are people who look back towards the PS3, just like we talked about earlier in this video, and think, oh, well, is Sony going to do that again with the PS5? They're not. They're just not. You notice how there's something very critical missing in this article. Okay, this individual who wrote this article failed to talk about the games, which is what we talk about here very frequently on the channel, because the truth is, at this point, the lifeblood of my channel, people think it's just PlayStation. It's not. It's not just the console itself. The lifeblood of my channel, and the thing that honestly keeps me really motivated to continue trying to make daily content and as much content as I can, it's the games. Sony has some amazing games, and Microsoft has some games too. They have had some games this generation, and it looks like they're set to do a better job next generation with games. At least I hope so, in the AAA space anyway, and maybe even some AA games as well. But that's the big differentiating factor here. Listen, if you think that Microsoft's just going to be able to come in next generation and say, look guys, Game Pass, look guys, backwards compatibility, don't you guys remember how much the PS3 messed up? XCloud, and just suddenly dominate. That's not how this works, okay? I think what this article writer is failing to understand is that all these things they mentioned, Project XCloud, things like Game Pass, these services, they're meant to kind of target a whole different audience, and that's what Microsoft is banking on capturing a new audience, bringing in more people. Again, it's about the numbers, right? And the easiest way to get the numbers is to offer things at the at the cheapest price point they possibly can. This is how Microsoft is kind of going forward, and they're still going to have an offering with Scarlett, and Anaconda, the high-end Xbox Scarlett console, that's going to appeal to the core gamer. But Sony has that on lock, man, and they have these games that, until, in my opinion, Microsoft is not going to stand a chance until they bring games that can go toe-to-toe with the games that Sony has been bringing. And I'm not talking about Gears, I'm not talking about Halo, nothing against those games, but they're tried and true, people know what to expect with them, and their audience doesn't seem to be growing significantly, at least based off of what I've seen. Okay, I think a lot of people are basically saying it's time for these franchises to evolve. Forza's fine. I mean, it's a racing game. I do think that they've been a little bit over-reliant on that as well this generation. I think that's kind of obvious. But the time has come for Microsoft to bring out games that can go toe-to-toe with some of Sony's best games. And until they do that, I don't think it's going to make a difference. I mean, XCloud will help. Game Pass will certainly help. It has been helping. But in terms of just overall appeal, overall excitement, people going out there buying the consoles, talking, if you're going to make a claim that Sony's going to lose next generation, listen, you're going to have more to back it up. And right now, we're just going to have to wait to see. So that's my thoughts on this article, guys. I thought this would make for an interesting video. It's a little bit different from what we normally do. So again, I want you to leave a like if you believe PlayStation is going to be the leader going into next generation with the PlayStation 5 and their services that they're going to offer. Or if you think that Microsoft's going to take that crown and suddenly make a big comeback and they're the ones that are going to be the leader, then in that case hit the dislike button. But also let me know your thoughts about this down in the comments below. Going to be really interested to see what you guys have to say. Leave the video a like if you did enjoy it. Again, the content's a little bit different, so be sure. I mean, I know that conflicts with what I just said about leaving a like for PlayStation, but you know, if you also enjoyed it, leave a like too. But subscribe to the channel as well. Hit the bell notification icon so you never miss an upload, and feel free to share this video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.